Well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I'm Dave Nichols. I'm the executive director down here. If you're members with us, thank you. It's your memberships that help us be able to find great presenters like this and do these programs. If you're not a member with us, we encourage you to become one. It's always fun to come down here and be a part of the mission of preserving Rice County history down here. So without further ado, help me in welcoming Jerri Fuller.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And just to piggyback off of David, I have 4 or 5 different memberships with genealogical and historical societies. And that's my little small token. I can keep a membership up and help keep the doors open, maybe. So, yeah, so I have an interesting background. We were just kind of talking about it a little bit, but I'll tell it to you in the story here. I first just wanted to know about my Fuller family because I didn't know it. My father wasn't available to share that history with me. So what I found out in letter writing to my aunts and uncles was my great-grandfather was married before he married the grandmother that I'm from. So it was kind of a mystery. It's like, well, who's Martha? And what do you mean she had a child named Clara? We didn't know anything about her because there was no history, pictures, or stories handed down. So that's when I got the idea that I've got to write her biography if I can. So in writing a biography, you just need to be insightful of all the history and to acquire collaborating facts so that you know you're on the right road. You don't want to be barking up the wrong tree. So I've had a lot of fun in doing this. Family history books are priceless. Roxana's Children traces Clara's parents, mother's parents' side. John Olin book up there in the corner is the only place I ever found a photo of Clara. And that book was written in 1893. I found that book in, I think, 1979. And I was just blown away that there was actually a photo of this lady that I had just heard about. The barber history, we'll leave that as a secret, we'll come back to that. Images of America in Middleton. My biggest success, not only getting the vital records like we talked about earlier, was to actually go to the places where my family lived. That means getting on a plane from California and flying to Minnesota. That means getting on a plane and flying to Rochester, where my daughter lived in upstate New York, and we drove to Canton, which is 30 Canada. I should have just brought my passport. We could have had a better time. But it's just in the going and the asking of local history that I just found so much more than I expected. And then I ended up in Massachusetts. So the images of America, Middleton, Massachusetts, Essex County blew my mind. I called the library, because you got to start at the library. Hi, I'm trying to find information on the Fullers. The lady starts to laugh. I don't see the joke. Which ones? I thought, this is interesting. I'm either in the wrong place or I'm in the right place. And there were 5 generations of Fullers that had been there. And I hit the mother lode. And we'll come to that. But so these places are my favorite in the world to get information. Rice County history. I learned a great deal about our early settlers who came in 1856. And that's part of my family's history. Finding Clara. The more family history I found, the more I knew there was more to find. My first challenge came at the onset in 1972 when I learned of a child named Clara Fuller. My mother did not know that my father's father had been previously married because there was no family history, no stories or photos handed down of Clara. Along the way, I became more aware of America's history alongside my Fuller family history. And I would go on to solve 7 family history mysteries back to 1638 in Middleton, Essex County, Massachusetts. Imagine my surprise when in 1997 I would discover so many connections to my family and the town of Northfield. The early years. So I had to learn how to do a sheet, right? Your father, mother, grandchildren, and who they married. So this is what it looked like for me. There's Charles, married Martha, had a daughter named Clara. Second marriage is Alice, and my grandfather is Charles Emerson Fuller the first. So that's how that goes. In 1972, the internet had not yet been invented. No powerful search engines could help me locate large genealogical databases. I learned of a child named Clara Fuller from one of my Fuller letters I had received. All I knew about Clara was that her father was my great-grandfather and that her mother's name was Martha. Clara May Fuller is my half-sister, third cousin. She is born from my great-grandfather, Charles Emery Fuller, and his first wife, Martha. Clara's birth certificate showed that she was born January 29, 1875, in Northfield, Minnesota. I was so excited, I solved my first mystery. Charles and Martha's marriage certificate then showed me that they were married May 18, 1872, in Northfield. And we found Martha's last name, and it was Way. Both of their fathers' names were provided as witnesses, John S. Way and Emery L. Fuller. Roxana's children. This is the heart of genealogical research. And my next mystery I had to solve was I needed to know where in Vermont Martha was born. Remember, I didn't have the internet to search any family databases. In 1974, I enlisted the help of the Mormon Church's Family History Center. You didn't have to be a Mormon to use the research center, but I had a friend that told me about it. And they had what they call an International Genealogical Index, or the IGI database. And I was hoping it might help me identify where in Vermont Martha was born. These records were kept on microfiche. Do you remember those? Okay, those are old for some of those back there. What is she talking about? Next, I found a book called Roxana's Children. And this book was really interesting find. I was going in for an employment interview. I had like 30 minutes to kill. I went into a bookstore. Now, I swear to you, my brain was empty. I'm just roaming around this bookstore. Oh yeah, Clara Fuller, her mother, Martha, Vermont. And I'm heading toward the New England section. Next thing you know, I'm in the Vermont section. Next thing you know, I see this pretty teal book. I opened the book and I started looking through the pages. Roxana Brown and Daniel Walbridge are Clara's great-grandparents, and this family history book identified their 11 children. I opened up the very front cover of the book. There's Martha Way. There's her dad, John S. Way, who married Sarah Walbridge. I left the store with the book in hand. I never went to the appointment. I didn't have the interview. I did not get the job of my dreams. I went home instead and I read this book. I was so fanatical about it that I did everything in my power to find out who the author was. The author is right on the front page there, Lynn Bonfield. In the front of her book, she says, I interviewed these 6 people. 4 of them have passed. There were 2 left. I had hope. I went through 411, got their phone numbers, left messages on their answering machines. They're up in the Bay Area. I was in Los Angeles. I get a phone call back at the end of the day. Hi, this is Lynn Bonfield. I understand you're interested in my book. I said, yes, I'm on the Fuller side. Oh my gosh, I know nothing about the Fullers, just that Charles is from had married Martha Way. She was doing the other side. If you look up here, there's Rick's family. Let's see where the Ricks is at. The Rickses are in here somewhere. Okay, Alfred Ricks on the second to the top. She ended up following that family and wrote her book based on that information. I learned that Clara's mother and father, John Way and Sarah Walbridge, were married October 16, 1849. It occurred in Peacham, Vermont. This history confirmed my earlier research collection. John returned home from panning for gold at the California Gold Rush on August 24, 1850, with his pockets full of rocks. He mined $2,700 worth of gold nuggets, which would be worth a fortune today. This activity prevented him from being present when Martha was born. She was born May 18th. That's a pretty good excuse if you're going to hear one. But in the meantime, when he came back across to go home, he stopped in a place called Northfield. And he thought, if I have any control of this, I think we're moving. We're going to be moving to the Midwest. So we'll fast forward back to 1997 when I first flew into Minneapolis to learn more about my Fuller family and history about Charles and his daughter, Clara. Charles E. had served in the Minnesota 1st Regiment of Heavy Artillery, Company 1, with the Minnesota Civil War. The activities of the 1st Regiment were published in the Minnesota in the Civil and Indian Wars, 1861 and 1865. Up at the front, I gave David copies of the narration of where his regiment served. And by law, through their Congress, they had to stipulate where these men were fighting and have an accountability of what happened. What's cool about this roster is Charles E. Fuller's name is at the very bottom. He mustered in at the age of 18 on February 15, 1865, and mustered out September 27, 1865. The interesting thing for me was you had the information about the officers up at the top, and then the remarks down to the side would tell what happened to these men during this time. Some were promoted, some were discharged, some were transferred, some even died, and they had to put which battlefield. This gentleman here, he died on Nashville battlefield, June 24th, 1865. I thought that information was really interesting to me. Minnesota was required to raise a militia for the Civil War effort, the same as the other states in the Union. The regiment's first orders were to get to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and to secure their heavy guns at Lookout Mountain. The rest, as they say, is history. The next thing I collected was a certificate of marriage for Charles and Martha Way. The neat thing about the certificate is it does show the two witnesses are John S. Way and Emery L. Fuller. The connection I had with Lynn Bonfield is she had letters that she could share with me about the family. But since they were somebody else's collection, they're not in the book, so you will not find them there. But this is Martha's honeymoon letter. So it was written May 23rd, 1872, to her mom. Dear Mother, you may perhaps like to know how we are doing and where we are. And as I have nothing else to do this afternoon, I will write a little. After quite a little run the day we left, we reached the cars. So she's talking about the trains. And in due time, we reached the city of St. Paul. We tried to persuade Charlie and Jen to go down with us and stay overnight, but they thought that they couldn't. We had a good hotel where we had everything to make us comfortable and happy. And that's a pretty good start of a letter if you're going to give it to your mom on your honeymoon. Things are looking good so far. Clara's mother, Martha Way Fuller, is buried near other Way family members in the Northfield Cemetery. Martha was 27 when she passed. This tender letter, again from Lynn Bonfield, is dated August 19, 1877, to Martha's mother, Mrs. Sarah Way. Isaac Watts is Sarah's stepmother. He was still living in Peacham, Vermont. Dear sister, I received some papers from Northfield several weeks ago giving the sad news of Martha's death. Your letter to Ella is a few days before led us to expect such news, and yet it still came suddenly, as bad as such news always does. I know you will all mourn for her very much, and I assure you that we will join with you in your sorrow and heartily sympathize you in this great affliction. I just find this to be so tender and so thoughtful for them to communicate on that level. I don't know if you're all that familiar with Northfield, but Clara Fuller, who was only 2 years old in 1877 when her mother died, she was kind of left up in the air here. Charles was a traveling salesman covering several states. John, as in John and Sarah Walbridge, had this family home built on St. Olaf Avenue in 1883. Clara lived there for 11 years. So Charles would work, bring home the bacon, give it to John and Sarah to help pay for the raising of her. I took this photo of the home in 1997 when John Ramsey owned the home, and he was a professor at Carleton College. So I'm just going to get off base here a little bit. When I got into this house and looked around, I remembered the stories from Roxana's children saying that Clara used to play on the parlor floor. The parlor floor also kept some beautiful furniture, antique furniture, that in 1964 was donated to the Smithsonian. So I thought that was pretty cool. The other thing that I thought was very interesting about the way history is it just kind of laid out, the owners of the family, they were going to take the two boys to go across to the Way Park and go play basketball. I go down to the Way Park, I look at the wall, and here's a plaque. Oh, this Way Park was donated by the Way family, who were original pioneers from 1867, and also donated the land for the hospital adjacent. I mean, you can't get that on the internet. You can't get that stuff. And I'm just sitting there going, wow. Emery L. Fuller, Charles' father, bought this property as the very first home he had in 1856. He sold this property in 1861. I have a copy of that deed, and the signer on that, who was the original he bought the land from, is President Buchanan, United States President Buchanan. He is the original owner of this land on the plat map. It's right next door to St. Olaf College. Charles Fuller bought it back in 1898 from James Wilson for himself and his new family. Clara visited this home as a young wife and mother. They lived there for 25 years until 1923 when Charles passed away. Then in 1924, St. Olaf College acquired the property. Sadly, after 98 years, the home was demolished. I discovered that this week. Very sad. I walked the property. I couldn't believe it. After 98 years, the home was demolished in 2022, and it was making way for the new college buildings. What they did leave behind were 4 beautiful trees that are about 40 feet tall. And that really warms my heart. I can almost forgive them. I did go to St. Olaf College, and I talked to the archivist, and then I also talked to the CFO of building. I wanted to see if there's an opportunity I can put a plaque on the next home or next building that's going to be put on that property to tell of the original owners. And she thought we could probably do that. I have to send in some documentation. It may take a few months, if not a few weeks. So I'm very proud of that. I at least will have something left. There were 4 bricks with mortar that happened to end up in my car, as well as a piece of wood that I'm pretty sure was on the apron of the house, but we won't tell anybody about that. So the Fuller children down here, you can see Charles and Alice, and the back row is Donald Fuller. This is Margaret Fuller, who passed away in 1919. Her obituary gave me the name of Clara's married name. So that's always a trick. If you don't know who they married, you can't look them up. But I was smart enough to figure if you're doing an obituary and you're putting people in order, there's a name ahead of the oldest child, it's a bet that it's going to be from the previous marriage. And it happened to turn out to be correct. This is my grandfather. This is Jessie Ray, who then went on to own the Grand Theater along with her husband, Everett Dilley, for 30 years during the early 1900s. This is Ralph Fuller. There is 21 years age difference between the oldest and the youngest of Charles' children. So we'll talk about Ralph a little bit. Ralph Fuller is the youngest of Charles' children, standing next to his father. He was born in the house, this White House, in 1903 and passed away in 2002 at the age of 99. Ralph's son, Kent, lives in Iowa City, and his daughter, Lynn Runstrom, lives in San Francisco. Clara was 33 years old when this family photo was taken in 1910. I think that's pretty neat. Clara W. Fuller, and again, you always want to have your proof. This is from the 1880 Federal Census, Northfield, Rice County. Martha Fuller passed away in 1877. Clara May was only 2.5 years old. This U.S. Census record shows that she was at the age of 5. She was born about 1875. Northfield, female, granddaughter. Father's and mother's birthplace is Vermont. That matches up with my microfiche. At the bottom it shows John and Sarah Way, and an aunt of hers, also named Clara, at the age of 22. It was verification I needed. It verified that Clara's parents were both born in Vermont, that Clara was born about 1875, and the relationship between Clara, Sarah, and John was that of a granddaughter. So when I came into Northfield in 1997, unbeknownst to me, I came in the day before the mock trial. That was the reenactment of the trial of Frank and Jesse James. They were trying to see if we use today's laws, if they would be convicted and sent to jail or hung or whatever. Marie Geary was the owner of the bed and breakfast where I stayed. She insisted that I attend the cast party at Kathy Ness's house. All she had to do was tell me that she was going to Kathy Ness's house, and I had to ask her if she worked at the library. Well, that was a good enough excuse to bring a stranger to a party, so I joined her. They were asking $75 for the tickets for this event. $75 is what I had in my pocket for copies, so I had to decline. By the end of the evening, they gave me a ticket. They were really hoping I would write about this event and it would be out in 2 weeks. It took me 24 years. So who knew that my family, Fuller family, might have a connection to this famously attempted bank robbery? The attempted bank robbery of the First National Bank in Northfield occurred September 7, 1876. What was just as interesting to me was that my great aunt, Jessie Ray Fuller, and her husband Everett Dilley once owned and operated the Grand for 30 years in the early 1900s. There is more history to be found about the Grand in Finding Clara. I started at the very beginning when it was the Ware Auditorium. Then I got to the Historical Society there on Bridge Square, and I found the connection on the front page of the Rice Journal. My great-grandfather, Emory L. Fuller, was listed as one of the sworn witnesses to the attempted robbery in 1876. So here are the sworn witnesses, Mr. Hobbs, Mr. Ale, E.L. Fuller. I thought that was amazing. I didn't even know anything about this bank robbery. All you got to do is show up. Hook and ladder number 1, Northfield, Minnesota. Who knew that I would find employment in history on my family at a fire department? After reading John Fuller's obituary, it stated that he had served at the Hook and Ladder number 1 for 27 years. I made a phone call to Northfield's fire department in the spring of '97 and was granted permission to come research their archives. What was interesting about this is they were getting ready for the parade in Stillwater with all their trucks. So he didn't want to be bothered with me. Here are the books, see you later, close the door. So I'm sitting here with a piece of paper and pencil. I want this copy, and I came back with my list, and he just pointed to the copier. Just help yourself. So the interesting thing about this is the very top poster I took a picture of, and it's in the book. It is a terrible rendition because technology isn't what it is today. I went back this week and took the same picture of the same poster, and it is like living color. It's beautiful. John Fuller is the gentleman in the middle. He started to work at the fire department in 1895 to 1922. He's Charles's brother. His son, Charles Fuller, worked there from 1922 to 1928. His father-in-law also worked from 1919 to 1945. So I don't know if we're talking about illegal hiring practices here, but I don't know if one person actually hired the other. But I thought that was pretty neat. So there's a picture of Mitch Dwyer and I. He was the one to blame for me to get all this information. And our 3 firefighters in my family served from 1895 to 1945. In 2005, my husband Jerri also retired from the fire department with the Navy. And that was pretty cool himself. And we stayed at the bed and breakfast again. But I mean, I'd never in my wildest dreams thought I would be collecting firefighter history as part of family history. In the John Olin book, I think I showed you in the beginning, there's more information in there than just genealogy. And I didn't actually discover this. I had the book in my hand for probably 20 years, and I sat down to read some more, and I found his sketch, his own bio sketch, in the back of the book. Well, this bio sketch talked about his involvement with the Underground Railroad. Chauncey C. Olin, the author of A Complete Record of the John Olin Family, is my great-granduncle. Within Chauncey Olin's biographical sketches, he relates unexpected information about the Underground Railroad from 1842 to 1859 in Waukesha, Wisconsin. His direct involvement helped over 30 slaves find freedom on the Underground Railroad by aiding them to Canada. The first Underground Railroad in Wisconsin had Waukesha and Milwaukee for its northern terminal. The first conductor was Deacon Samuel Brown. Most of these people were actually Quakers, and so they all had a very similar mindset of taking care of one another, and we are all family and friends in this life. The first passenger over the line is the lady there, Caroline Quarles. She was an escaped slave from St. Louis in 1842. And I tell the story of the terrible man Titball. You'll have to read the book to find out what happened. There's always going to be a villain in this story. The other two slaves, Joshua Glover and Lewis Washington, also found their freedom on the Underground Railroad. Chauncey's biography tells how Joshua Glover's case went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court and to President Buchanan. It was an exceptional case prior to the Civil War, which then fired even more people to get involved and make sure that we were all fighting for the right reasons. His sketches also includes a few beautifully written slave jubilee songs as well. And the lyrics and the simple rhyme, you read through them because you don't have the melody, they're very heartfelt and you can understand their struggle. The other thing that Chauncey had in his biography is about his niece, Clara Fuller, and her additional education in 1891. Chauncey describes his niece's additional academic history. She was always been a good scholar and paid strict attention to her schoolwork. While in high school at Northfield, she had additional instruction from a competent teacher of elocution. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm going to say public speaking from now on. The State Educational Association of Minnesota had their annual meeting December 28, 1891 in St. Paul, and it offered prizes for the best speech effort. 100 points were the maximum to be earned. Miss Clara W. Fuller earned 89 points, the highest given that day. She was 16 years old, and that was the first prize she had ever won. Her recital was the simple love story rhyme Archie Dean. I looked for that, and I haven't been able to find a copy of it. The audience applauded the effort and wanted an encore. Chauncey goes on to say that he and his sister Althea Olin Fuller, her grandmother, were very grateful and thought Clara had a bright future. Rice County Historical Society and Museum, and Carleton College Gould Library Archives. Emory L. Fuller's family and several of the Olin family members participated in the Great Western Migration of 1845. These families traveled together from Canton, New York to Waukesha, Wisconsin in 1845. They mostly stayed there 9 to 10 years, and then they all got together and decided they're going to go on to Northfield, and they did so in 1856. That's when the borders opened for people to come homestead. Rice County Historical Society and Museum documented when the Fullers, the Olins, and the Way families entered Northfield. I copied the Rice County plat maps and their histories of these early settlers of Northfield, Rice County. They also had a copy of the Illustrated Atlas of 1874. And this has an abundance of early Rice history and nationwide statistics. I was amazed to learn that Northfield itself, Rice County, during the heyday, so this is 1856, 1860, had over 400,000 people come across in that migration. And by 1874, you had about 5,000 people that were staying. I thought that was amazing. Carleton College's Gould Library kept the academic history of Charles Fuller. Senior archivist Eric Hillerman's expertise located Clara's father, Charles Fuller, college record from 1876. And that's the first year that the college opened its doors. Charles and Martha were taking 2 of the same classes, prep and English. 5 years later, they were married in 1872. Then I discovered Clara Fuller's post-high school education there when she attended Carleton College in the fall of 1894. This was 26 years after both of her parents had attended there. Eric then brought me William Harold Holland's college record and a copy of his class photo. This is the only photo I have of her husband, and I got it from the college class record. He graduated in 1895 with a classical degree. Clara, like her father, met and married a student from Carleton College. Clara Fuller and William Hollins were wedded June 11, 1896. Then Eric brought me the college records of Clara's children, Harold and Margaret Hollins, who graduated from Carleton in the 1920s. More details about Clara's children, their education, and history are found in my book. Carleton's archives preserve 3 generations of my Fuller family members who attended college from 1876 to 1924. I just thought that was amazing. This is a copy of Clara's marriage certificate. And the sought-after thing that you want to get when you're writing a biography is you want to get that announcement of the wedding. You got to find that article. Well, what was really great about Northfield is that was a Carnegie library. And in 1997, they had over 1,900 newspaper articles going back to like 1865. So I hit the mother lode again, and I'll just read you a little bit of this one. The spacious residence of Mr. and Mrs. John S. Way, that was the home that she grew up in with her grandparents, was the scene of a very happy wedding. Thursday afternoon, Miss Clara Fuller, daughter of C.E. Fuller of Minneapolis, and William W. Hollins of Mid-Bank, South Dakota, were the happy recipients. The house was beautifully decorated with ferns and roses. When the proper time came, the bride and groom entered the parlor, preceded by 3 little flower girls, Gertrude Greaves, Margaret Fuller, who we saw in another photo, and Jessie Ray Fuller, who would then own the Grand Theater. The following guests were present from Minneapolis: Mr. and Mrs. Charles E. Fuller and children, Mrs. Laurel and Lucille Way, and Elwood Way and Mrs. Harris. So the 2 girls, Laura and Lucy Way, were the same girls that gave the land for the Way Park and the land for the hospital. Mr. and Mrs. Hollins left on the evening train for Montevideo, where they will remain for about a week before going to Big Stone Lake to spend the summer. I don't know where Big Stone Lake is, but it's got to be a good place. You're nodding?
Well, my husband's from Millbank,
Oh,
and Big Stone is like in the shape of Minnesota, you know, where the western
Yes.
side where it flips out.
Yeah.
And the Minnesota River starts.
okay.
The Minnesota River starts in Big Stone. So
Oh, it sounds beautiful. It sounds
It's a
beautiful.
little windy.
Okay. So here again, the more family history I found, the more I knew there was more to find. With this additional information of Clara's marriage information, I could then complete her biography, because now I could research it. Otherwise, I'm just stopping at like age 22 or something. The other thing you want to do in genealogy is you want to make sure you've got at least 2 records, people, for each one of your events. And this is from the Minnesota marriages, showing Clara W. Fuller was married on the same date that the certificate says, and married in the same place, and married to the same spouse. So once you line those things up, you're in pretty good shape. This week I photographed Clara's headstone. I've done it before in the past, and it's rather boring. It's just a person's name, information on a piece of cement. I thought it might be kind of fun to put her picture next to it, and I bought just some flowers that I'm going to hopefully get home to me. So I thought that made kind of a little better representation of who might be there. The only photo I have of Clara Fuller Hollins was included in the John Olin family record, written by Chauncey, my great-great-granduncle, when she was about 19. The only photo I have of Harold Hollins is from his class picture at Carleton College. From the name of the informant on her certificate here, this is her death record, is Margaret Hollins Parker, and that's her daughter, Margaret Hollins. She married a guy named Mark Parker. So when I go to Ancestry here in early 2000s, I'm finding her husband and their children, and now I can write about that, and they're included in the book. So the other thing I noticed here is she had tremendous problems with her bronchial tubes, and that was also her mother's part, how she died. She had lung issues. So I was just sad to see that she only lived till 68, but I thought that was kind of neat information. Okay, so my daughter, I got to blame this on my daughter. I was all set up to go on this trip in 1997, flying to Minneapolis, come down to Northfield, and she said, well, Mom, are you going to talk to any Fuller relatives? I hate to tell you, I didn't even think about living relatives because I don't work with living relatives. I don't know any living relatives. I just do the stuff with the books and online and this kind of thing. So I, again, reached out to 411 and I said, can you help me with any Fullers that might have the name John, Charles, something like that? Well, she says, well, we do have a Charles in Owatonna. Wasn't sure where that was, but I was happy with it. I left another message on an answering machine. Lovely lady calls me back and she says, my husband is the family with which you are talking about. On the far left is Beverly. There's Charles. Charles looks just like my brother and my dad, so I knew I had the right family. And then their aunt, Caroline Fuller Fleisch, was down visiting from the cities. I was tickled to death to meet these people. I was 43 years old by the time I met my first Fuller relative. Yes, ma'am. Is it here or is it Owatonna? I don't know. I know I'm related to the one in Owatonna, and they actually named a baseball field after him. And this is one of the baseball games that I went to when I was visiting them. I was down there last Tuesday and did a presentation. Oh, Charlie Fuller, yeah, he did the baseball thing, and I'm going, that's the right family. But I don't know if they're up here. I've lost contact with Beverly. Yeah. Yeah, like 2017 or something, 14 or. Well, if you can hook me up to, if you can hook me up to Beverly, I write letters, they never come back. So I don't know if she just has an issue with responding or not. Okay, all right. Okay, lovely people, lovely people. So what Caroline brought, she couldn't sit at the bleachers very long, so I went back to the apartment with her. And she says, boy, have I got some stuff for you. And she's like this. And I'm like going, okay, I'm not real sure. Do I need to call 911? I don't know what's happening. And she says, no, I've got some Fuller pictures. Fuller pictures. I mean, the only one I had was from 1910, and that was the group picture. So the first one she has is of Emma LaPointe here, taken in 1883, and that's John's wife. And she's got a bustle, and she just looks adorable there. The next picture she hands me is of John, Charles, and Mary. This picture was taken in 1883. Then she turns to me and she says, nobody knows who these people are. And now the hairs on my arms are standing up. I've got goosebumps and I'm choked up. And I said, well, that's Althea. I know that because of the John Olin book. That's his sister, and that's the book we were talking about. That has to be Emriel. So now I'm very emotional. I can hardly stand it. I ask her for the picture. I know this stuff by heart. I wrote it all down. Birth, marriage, death, where the events took place. And it was really quite a moment. That's when I knew I was writing a book. I got her permission. It was wonderful. 3 months later, she passed away. So you can't tell me that wasn't supposed to happen. But they're now in the very front of my book, and it only took me 24 years to write it. And then a year and a half with a publisher. But these are just priceless. If you have pictures at home, write on the back of them. Tell other people who they are. Family history books. Here we are back to John Olin. I discovered this Olin history book in 1996. He and all of his 12 siblings lived in Canton, New York, where I would go and visit. Chauncey's sister, Althea Olin, married Clara's grandfather, Emriel Fuller, in 1843. In 2010, I traveled to Canton, where Emory and Althea once lived. There I made several interesting Fuller family history discoveries. They include a quilt, not this one, 100 acres of farmland, and a few headstones of John and Violet's family in the Jerusalem Cemetery outside of Canton. There are more interesting details about these items found in my book. Emriel's father is John L. Fuller, and he was born in 1788 in Middleton, Massachusetts. I didn't know we were going to Massachusetts. I didn't know how far we were going. I'm just taking one day at a time. And I did not know when or where John's wife, Violet, was born or what her surname was. We're back to that same problem, trying to find out about a woman's last name. But I did locate a will of a John Fuller. This will and testament was for John Fuller, was Emery's brother. He died May 2nd, 1876 in Canton. This will is an outstanding genealogical find, and the next slide will show you. Emery's grandfather is John Fuller II. He was born in August 1757 in Middleton, Massachusetts. John Fuller II is our American Revolutionary soldier, and he died in Canton January 8, 1840. Caleb Olin, Althea's grandfather, also served in the war for our independence, and I do have a copy of his headstone in the book. I learned a great deal about John Fuller's service when I obtained a copy of his pension record and application. He served in the Massachusetts and on the Connecticut line during the American Revolution. You'll have to discover why John Fuller II is not a junior in the pages of my book. I solved over 7 family history mysteries. So I'm just about as exhausted. I don't know how you are, but I'm about exhausted, but I'm not done yet. And I just wanted to know more. This last will and testament was really cool. He named all 8 of his siblings, so he's one of 9 children. He also listed all of his sisters' married names. Thank you very much. And where each of them were living in 1876. I found this will in Salt Lake City when I had a weekend free, and I just took a quick trip over there and spent 3 days, and I came up with this will. So Amanda Ewers is his first sister. Second sister is Betsy Palmer and Lovina McKay. They were all living in Canton in 1876. Maria Robinson is the daughter of his sister, named Maria, who also married an Olin family. She was living in Vineland, New Jersey, and she also was going to get a portion out of this will. Emery L. Fuller, Josiah S. Fuller, and Jane Merrill, they were all living in Northfield at the time. And then the last child's name is Z.I.M. something. His youngest brother could not be located. Here is Z.I.M. Are those 2 R's? Are those 2 S's? Is that a U? I could get Z.I.M. If it was Zachariah, it would be Z-A-C-H. I could have gotten that. This isn't that easy. So that left me wanting another mystery to solve. I needed to identify the youngest child of John and Violet's family, and I still did not know Violet's last name. Using the research method called the cha-cha, you guys familiar with that? Interesting stuff. So you want to go back another generation, but you don't know what that last name is. If you go forward in time and look at everybody's middle names, they're going to throw in somebody's surname. So this is what the cha-cha is. I finally used the Fuller family naming convention. It was repeated one more time. Emery and Althea named their last child John Olin Fuller. He was a firefighter. Olin was Althea's maiden name. I requested the birth records of both John and Charles's children. One of John's sons was named Henry Barber Fuller. That was the clue. Violet's father was named Zimri Barber. Emery and Violet named their last son after her father. So now, if I go back to the will, it's Z-I-M-R-I, Zimri. It was wonderful. It was wonderful for me. The Barbers moved to Canton, New York from Barkhamsted, Connecticut in the early 1800s. The discovery of the Barber genealogy book was amazing, and it recorded their family history back to 1614, all the way up to 1909. Then I traveled to Massachusetts. So here's an interesting story. I contacted the Flint Library, as you're wont to do. You got to start at the library first. I'd like to find out about, any Fullers that are in the area. The lady laughed, and she says, "So which ones?" I had no idea that I was going to be hitting this spot where so many Fullers lived. So I told my husband, I said, "We got to get this book." I bought this book, and it showed the picture of our oldest family's house. It was built in 1684. I contacted the author of the book. I contacted the publisher of the book. "Can I please get permission to use this picture in my book?" Crickets. Heard nothing. "Okay, honey, I guess we're going to Massachusetts." I say, "What?" "Okay." So we kind of put the Massachusetts trip in the mix, but hadn't committed to it. My daughter calls me in March of 2020. Hi, Mom, I just did the 23andMe test, the DNA test, and do I have a cousin who was born in 1965? I about gasped. My sister had a child out of wedlock in 1965. My sister passed away in 2019, missed her by 3 months. I then took the test, and it did confirm that that is my niece. I said, this is wonderful. Where do you live? Dobbs Ferry, upstate New York. It's pretty close to Massachusetts. Now I got 2 reasons to go, so it's looking a little better for me. Then my daughter says, I'll tell you what, why don't we all go down to New York City as long as we're going to be on the East Coast? Well, how do you say no to that? So we made tickets. I bought tickets. We flew into Boston. Then we went to Salem for a few days. Then we ended up in Middleton. And I could not believe what I found. The Flint Public Library, the Guide to Middleton's History, indicated the locations of historical sites on their website. Using their guide, we found our earliest home, Lieutenant Thomas Fuller's house, built in 1684. Isn't that a beautiful picture? The other picture was black and white, and it was a completely different view. You didn't even get to see the side. So I'm very happy that I took that picture. This is on the National Registry of Historic Homes, and I took the picture in August 2021. The director, Loretta Johnson, mentioned Images of America, Middleton by Shirley Paul Reynard and the Middleton's Historical Society. And those are the people that didn't answer me back. You will have to read my book, Finding Clara, to obtain the details of the last 3 generations of my Fuller families in Massachusetts. When I began Clara Fuller's biography, I had no idea I would spend 40 years discovering 11 generations of my Fuller family history back to 1638. This is one of the slides. It's in part 5 of my book. I've got 22 pages of these genealogies. So my daughter, again, I got to blame her for this. She says, you know, you did research on the Andersons, the Woodwards, the Royers, the Olins, the Barbers. They're in the 22 pages. So if you follow this with the gold stars, Emery and Althea, we talked about them quite a bit. This is Charles. That's the Civil War guy. There's Mary. They made that trek over that long distance from New York to Wisconsin. She passed away in 1845. There's Charles. He served in the Civil War. This is Mary Eccles. We saw that 3rd child of the 3. This is Clara M. She died at the age of 10 in Northfield. Then there's John Olin, whose middle name is Olin, John Olin Fuller. Each one of the children that had children, got married and had children, named a daughter Clara, daughter Clara, daughter Clara, after their sister, who died at the age of 10. Thought that was pretty neat. Clara's colonial ancestors in 1757 to 1638. The first genealogical resource to these individual colonial records is from the Vital Records online. So what's really tough about getting back into these histories is you have to be able to make that connection. You can search Mayflowers to death, you can look up and down, but if you don't have anything to lock you in, you're wasting your time. So that was the first place I looked, and I saw that I had matched up with John Fuller II. They confirmed that John Fuller II was born to Andrew Fuller. I guess I let the secret out. Now you know why he's not Junior, because his father's name was Andrew. There were 8 children born to that family. The first 4 died. So what they did is they reused the first child's name that died a second time. So his whole life he was known John Fuller II. On his application for the American Revolution, he signs his name, John Fuller II. I thought that was pretty cool. They confirmed that John Fuller II was born to Andrew Fuller and Elizabeth Clark, 1757. Andrew's father, John Fuller, was born December 22nd, 1676. And John Fuller's father was Thomas Fuller, Jr., born February 26, 1644 in Woburn. Woburn then changed its name to Charleston in Massachusetts. You can read more about these colonial families tying into the renowned Peabody families and Watkin families of Massachusetts. The second genealogical resource I found was the Fuller Generation Volume 4. And this is really cool because I found this book about 15 years ago. I go online to see if I can find a better copy. This is now public domain, which means you can copy any sentence, any picture, anything you find in that, and there's no copyright issues. You can use it in your family book, just like I used it in my family book, which is really cool because you don't have one more barrier to get over, one more blocked wall to get through. So I found that book by William Fuller, and it recorded that Thomas Fuller Sr. sailed into Cambridge Harbor in 1638 from Norfolk, England, and he settled in Woburn, which became Charleston. Thomas Fuller Jr. is the first of our Fuller family who was born in America, in Massachusetts, under the Massachusetts Compact, so that's English government. The third resource is the book written by Arthur Buckminster Fuller, who is the great-grandson of Thomas Fuller. Arthur includes a poem written by Thomas. Thomas's intention coming to the United States, he was 21, loaded, very well off, educated, had a ship, comes over. I'm just going to stay a year. I'm just going to check out this new, this newfangled thing happening over across the pond. And he decides that the information he's getting about the religious practices are 20 times better than what's going on in England. And he decides to stay. He then lives in Woburn, has his family, and he meets some people in the area, like at the farmer's market, and they're saying, you really ought to come up to Middleton. We sure could use a blacksmith. He came up there, fought in Philip's War, and ended up buying 300 acres from General Dennison, which is a very large part of Salem and a small part of Middleton, but it's now still part of Middleton. I thought that was pretty cool. I discovered America's history alongside my Fuller family history in Northfield, Canton, and Middleton. The question was asked if our ancestors came from England on the Mayflower. I said no. Our English ancestors sailed into Cambridge Harbor, Massachusetts in 1638 instead. So I had a lot of fun writing my book. I hope you have a lot of fun reading my book. My publisher said, I think you've got another angle to your book. And I said, okay. She says, you did a pretty good job of writing this. Can you maybe put together a guide to writing your family history? And I thought, I've got the perfect book I can reference. So I've been doing that now. I work with genealogy and writing clubs and libraries for writing assignments. And the whole idea is write and share. So you've got 6 people at your table, and somebody says, write an introduction to your family history. Everybody's going to write it differently. And now you're going to share that. Oh, that sounds like a good way to do it. Oh, I like this better than that. Or you know what, mine's pretty good, I'm keeping it. It really helps to expand how you view the way you're going to write. These 3 articles I put together, you might recognize the Illustrated Atlas for Minnesota 1874. I wrote about this because it does talk about the information I found out about the early settlers. E.L. Fuller, Nativity, St. Lawrence County, New York, date into Minnesota 1856. He's a patron, which means he's the first landowner that has the president's signature on it. And that's really some exciting stuff you can get on your family. The other one here, I wrote about my parents. My mom was a wartime bride. I put that up on Facebook. I had 850 hits in 2 weeks. The writing's not that great. It's good. It's the topic. We're losing our World War II veterans, and we still have members that remember those times, and that's what's being celebrated. I couldn't stay on the phone enough to answer people's questions or to say, yes, I had a similar experience. That's cool. So if you need a topic to write about, that's a good one. The other one I wrote about is Hidden in Plain Sight, and that was Clara's married name. It was right after Mom and Dad, because she's the oldest of all of the children, and that's how I figured out what her married name was. So that's what I have for you today, and I hope you've enjoyed the history lesson. Thank you for showing up.